I looked at how well AI runs on Windows 11 versus Linux. The results won't make Microsoft happy. Let's talk about it. So welcome to Dave is Not AI. I'm Dave, an AI SME, an AI skeptic, looking at AI with a balanced perspective. Let's get started. So the origin of this video kind of came from you guys. I had a few DMs since the last video I did on Windows 11 and talked about some of the AI features they were forcing at us, forcing at Windows 11 users, and kind of a forced upgrade, and people had to upgrade their hardware. And I'll go ahead and link to the video here if you haven't seen that yet. I think it's important. And I got a lot of questions about how well AI runs on Windows 11 versus some of the other operating systems, specifically Linux. And AI meaning, in other words, if we're going to do inference, we're going to do model training, things like that on our desktop computers, on our laptop computers, how well will Windows 11 perform with all the features that it needs and the power that it needs to run those sorts of things versus another competing operating system, namely Linux, because everybody seems to be making the move to Linux right now. So I looked at both and took an objective look in terms of some features and functions that you need to have running on your computer to make AI work well. And here's the results. So keep in mind, I'm just looking at desktop computers, laptops, systems we would buy and assemble. So just the stuff that we would buy from Costco, so to speak, that is able to run different operating systems. So I'm defining performance, really in this case, AI performance on a desktop, which means more than just raw speed. So I'm not just looking at how fast the things process. I think people have a tendency, when you hear performance, they look at the CPU clock speed and IO tests and things like that, things that I used to do back in the 90s when I worked for PC Magazine. And that's not what we're looking at here. We're looking at performance as a complete package and performance around just use cases for AI. So it includes how fast results appear, how smoothly the system stays responsive, while models run, and how well the PC uses the GPU and memory without crashes or slowdowns. And so again, just specifically at the AI use cases, this is not about running Word or productivity tools or databases on this. This is about people developing AI systems, running AI systems, and how functional is one operating system over the other. So I'm also looking at reliability over long sessions, stability after updates, and how easily you can install, update, and keep AI tools working. So good AI performance means consistent time to result, predictable behavior, and workflow that doesn't fight you. So you spend more time creating and less time troubleshooting. So which ones are going to be more problem-free? Which ones are going to give you the least amount of headaches? And that's kind of what I looked at in looking at both operating systems. I did run them and, did a few AI tasks on each, but ultimately this is about researching and what the group of AI systems out there. Obviously, couldn't test all of them, and how they perform on these particular systems is reported by other testers and reported by other analysis. So let's go through them. So the big one, and this is kind of a game changer for me because obviously I work with enterprises. I don't work with home computer people, typically big Global 2000 companies, and they're trying to figure out which operating system is going to provide them with the best bang for the buck if they're going to have many of their employees, many of their staffers who are going to be using AI systems. So I looked at really kind of the pragmatic path there. So things like more AI projects target Linux first. And this was a big thing. If you look in the AI world, they're going to focus on Linux because it's an operating system that provides better scalability for them. It runs on lots of different processors and lots of different servers. So it's going to provide some, transferability and upgradability to other systems. So many open source model, repos, install guides and fixes assume Linux is the setup. So you spend less time adapting instructions. And so most of the time when I deal with operating systems that are used with AI systems, Linux is typically the preferred operating system. And obviously if more people are using that, you're going to have an easier time in getting the thing set up because there's more people who understand how to use it. You can find help, all that kind of stuff. And that seems to be something that's going to go to Linux versus Windows 11. Next would be smoother GPU setup, for serious AI work, especially NVIDIA. Linux is commonly the default environment for getting the most reliable results with GPU accelerated training and heavy inference engines out there. So this is this is the core of what you do with AI systems. So in other words, I'm going to train a model. I'm going to leverage a model through an inference-based processing. And so we're looking at an operating system that's going to do that in the smoothest way, and it's going to provide the best performance. In that case, it goes to Linux. And because more development's been done there, there was more research done there. And the operating system's just better suited, for what AI does. And I've been using AI, since the 80s. And, it's gone through a lot of iterations, things like that. But I kind of look at it first and foremost as a very robust operating system. And, Linux is just an open source version of it that's able to do a lot of things. And it's been tuned and used in different ways. And people have kind of beat it into a better performer than the commercial operating systems out there like Windows 11. So next would be better match for cloud and lab machines. So if you plan to move from your laptop to a bigger GPU server later, Linux on your laptop keeps your workflow consistent and end-to-end. So this is the upgradability thing we talked about. So if you're looking to move to bigger processors, you can certainly do that with Windows operating systems, but Linux is going to provide a better option for you. And you could move them up into the cloud. Obviously, you have Linux that runs on Amazon Web Services and Microsoft, and you can leverage operating systems that way. So it provides some upgradability and transferability, which is very important to my Global 2000 clients that are really looking for a consistent upgrade path. In other words, where they can take it, can they scale it up? Is it something that's going to be usable in the long run? Easier to keep AI environments clean and repeatable. So it's straightforward to isolate projects so one model's setup doesn't break another setup. So it was helpful when you juggle multiple repos. So again, your ability to clean up an environment and without having a lot of junk running the environment, that's going to go to Linux. And they have a better architecture, in my opinion, than Windows 11 does. And your ability to isolate projects and your ability to set the whole thing up. And the big thing is having more control over the operating system. Linux is going to give you, better controls and better granular controls of the operating system components. And so you're able to tune it better and therefore able to make it run better. Also, containers running on Linux are going to be more natural. So running AI tools in containerized environments is, typically more seamless on Linux. And most container developers will tell you that normally they use Linux almost exclusively, which helps with the reproducibility and works on my machine problem. So in other words, if you're able to provide a consistent platform and you're providing a common testing platform, things like that, Linux is able to provide you with a better replicant of your production environment, and you're able to replicate them easier. Not as easy with Windows 11 as most of the people who use Windows 11, even Windows 11 diehards will tell you that. Lower background overhead often. So Linux can run with fewer background tasks. So competing for RAM and CPU resources, which matters when models are memory hungry. This is huge, okay? So in other words, if Linux is able to run with fewer background tasks, that means that that system is going to run faster. So all things being equal, if you're setting up a machine as a dual boot, kind of system where you're booting, Linux and you're booting Windows 11 and you're running the same sort of components, you're going to notice this pretty quickly that the more memory hungry that these AI systems are, and they're all memory hungry, they just hog resources like crazy, the faster that it's going to run on Linux, because Linux is able to provide you with better, more efficient access to resources. And by the way, that's no matter if you run it on your laptop or run it in the cloud. It's a well architected operating system. Better command line workflow for AI tasks, things like running training scripts, managing long jobs, automating experiments, and remote access, SSH, things like that are usually simpler and more ergonomic on Linux. And I can attest that. I've used both operating systems before, for a long time, and recently introduced myself to Windows 11. Found some issues with it though. But ultimately, you're able to have better technical flexibility with the Linux operating system, certainly for the command line workflow stuff that's out there. And so Windows wasn't really designed to be a command line based operating system. It was designed basically as around a graphical user interface through all the iterations of the origins of Windows in the 90s. And that's when I was, dealing with it at that time. Linux, Unix in general, can be very handy if you're able to run things at the command line. And obviously I do a lot of things at command line. Even on my Mac, I'll bring up the command line and, which runs Unix, and run the Unix system in the background to have more fine-grained control over the operating system. Windows 11 doesn't necessarily provide you that unless you're willing to get into the depth of the operating system and use specialized tools, where Linux provides you a command line and you're able to, see directly what's running and control it in a fine-grained way, which, as a developer and someone who deploys these systems, I don't anymore. I'm an architect now, build and deploy and build big projects and things like that. But that's going to make things easier for you, because you're not going to get the same sort of robustness in the Windows 11 operating system. Faster troubleshooting and community support for AI on Linux, because so many AI developers use Linux. You'll find more Linux specific answers, and they tend to be more direct and actionable. This is a big one for me. So in other words, I find it easier to get support from the Linux community, and certainly the Linux AI community, because there's more people doing it, and more people doing it is going to attract more people, to the operating system fundamentals and understand the technical details that are going to be willing to help you. Not as easy on Windows 11, not pushing it way. You obviously can go to Microsoft for Windows 11 support, things like that. But you don't get the level of support when you're doing weird things, which you end up doing weird things when you're building AI systems. Obviously you have to get into some, kernel tuning stuff and, things like that. And, tuning the system to optimize it for, training and to optimize it for inference. Much easier to do with Linux, and there's more people around who are going to tell you the details on how to do it. And you've obviously look here on YouTube. There's a bunch of Linux gurus around that know way more about Linux than I do, and you're able to get better support from those people than the Microsoft Windows 11 world, in my opinion. But some people may disagree with that, and that's fine. But in my opinion, I think Linux is going to work out better for you. And I end with a big one: more control over performance tuning. This is the reason. If that was the only reason to use Linux over Windows 11, it would be my reason for that, because it is everything when you build these AI systems. They're memory hogs. They take a lot of resources, whether you're using GPUs, CPUs, or both. And their CPUs are part of GPUs, by the way. You can more easily adjust the system behavior, power performance settings, memory swap behavior, to favor long AI runs. One of the things that was very handy when I was a Unix administrator in the 90s is just the degree of control that I had tunables around using the system. So in other words, I could customize the system for the applications that were running on it. So if it was a database server, I could tune it one way. If it was a process server, I could tune it another way. And also if it's an AI system, it could be running inference. I want to tune it one way for that. So I'm optimizing the system for inference processing or training processing. And that capability is everything to me when you're running these systems. You got to remember that if a carefully tuned server, in this case, a desktop computer, things like that is optimized for AI, is going to run way faster, just because you're going to have, less swaps. You're going to memory and, different virtual memory space and, better IO optimization, all that kind of stuff you can tune into the system, where I'm not aware that you can do that to the degree on Windows 11. Of course, people can point out that the tunables are going to be there, and they both provide tunables, not knocking them for that. It's just the ones, in my opinion, on Linux are going to be more robust, easier to use, and more people are going to understand how to use them. Well, anyway, obviously, my opinion, and if you disagree with me, put that in the comments. If you agree with me, put it in the comments. If you disagree with the methodology or, what I use to evaluate them, or basically looking at the attributes, you have other attributes I should be looking at, I'm here to learn. But ultimately, I'm also here to report back my opinion in terms of what this technology is and whether you should leverage it or not. Right now, I have, dozens of Global 2000 companies that are on my clients that are looking at their desktop computing, and they're making decisions as to whether to go one way or the other. And obviously, if they're going to be running AI natively on those desktops, then the operating system is going to be a huge decision, and they're going through that thinking right now. So I'm here to help them and here to help you guys. So let me know what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my other videos on this channel. Also check out my InfoWorld Cloud Computing blog, my 100 plus LinkedIn learning courses, and of course my generative AI architecture course out on Go Cloud Careers. And finally, my latest books, Unlocking the Power of Cloud and An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. So until next week, stay very, very safe. The magical YouTube algorithm thinks this is another one of my videos that you should watch next. Take care, guys.